Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, October 12th, 2023. Matthew Ho joins us now. Matt, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming back to the show. What is your take on the now recognized as colossal intelligence and military failure by the government of Israel last weekend?
I think, like most of these things, there are a number of reasons for it that come together to form the perfect storm. And then, uh, uh, what's the definition of luck, right? Preparation and timeliness. And I think that's what occurred here was that you had a breakdown on the Israeli side for another reasons. For a number of reasons, the Palestinians prepared for it, the Hamas prepared for it, Islamic Jihad prepared for it, and then the timing was right, and the attack occurred at the time that the Israelis had really let their guard down for a number of reasons, some accidental and some because of negligence. One of the things is the Israelis moved the bulk of an infantry brigade from the Gaza border up to the West Bank. And this was to protect the settlers in the West Bank. And if you've been following this, of course, every year the settlements in the West Bank expand and settler aggression grows more aggressive. So the Israelis moved a couple of battalions of their infantry away from Gaza to the West Bank to protect the settlers. And this goes into another aspect of why this may have occurred, was because the West Bank was a priority over Gaza. Syria is a priority over Gaza. Lebanon is a priority over Gaza. Iran is a priority over Gaza. I heard Colonel McGregor on your show talk about how invested the Mossad is in Ukraine. So you look at what the priorities were for Mossad, Shin Bet, for UTA 8200, for the Israeli army, for the Israeli border police, and you see that Gaza was probably number 5. And then the other aspects of this too, I think people are familiar with in the sense that the prime minister of Israel for the last couple of years has had a policy of trying to basically bribe the Gazans into good behavior, bribe Hamas into good behavior by providing work permits and allowing the Qataris to send them a lot of money. And I'm sure because of the groupthink that's within any type of bureaucracy, but especially a corrupt one, as we know from what the Netanyahu government has been like, you go along because you think it's working. You want it to work. So nothing that runs counter to that, you're going to really acknowledge too much, particularly if it's going to upset the boss. Who's going to go in there and tell the boss, your big plan is not working? And then there's another reason as well. I heard the Israeli writer Gideon Levy talk about this. He said when the Israeli army, its focus for years has been on shooting teenagers, throwing stones. This is the quality of army you're going to have. And so I think you roll all those things together.
Is it a myth that Mossad is the best intelligence service and the Israelis have the best military, at least in the Middle East?
I think they're like any institutions, right? They can become victims of their own success. They can believe their own hype. They exist within a bubble, and then part of their job is to win the political and media hearts and minds out there. So they're happy to throw along and go along with media stories, but also Hollywood stories that depict how great the Mossad is, and we have that with the CIA in the United States. People think the CIA is full of James Bonds, when if you just look at their history, what they have accomplished in the last 70 plus years since their creation, it has just been a legacy of counterproductive disaster and horror after another.
So some of your colleagues have suggested, as you have, that one of the principal errors is arrogance, which I suppose is almost endemic in these swaggering intelligence communities who are allowed to kill with impunity. And the other is an over-reliance on AI rather than human intelligence.
I think that's the case. You've heard that commendation quite a bit about the American intelligence, particularly over the last 20, 30 years, the reliance on signals intelligence rather than actual human intelligence, and actually people there who you can trust, who will give you information as they see it, as opposed to data that has to be translated by an analyst someplace. I'll give you an example of this. When I was in Afghanistan, I had someone from the Defense Intelligence Agency contact me, and asked me that if in the province I was in, Zabul province, which is in the southeast of the country bordering Pakistan, were there any Uzbeks there? And right off the bat, I knew there were no Uzbeks there. Uzbeks are one of the populations and demographics of the demography of Afghanistan. And so I wrote back and I said, no, there's absolutely none here. This place is completely Pashto. There's no group of Uzbeks living here. And the analyst writes back and he said, can you double check that? And so I went and I spoke to the deputy governor of the province, the police chief of the province, the intelligence chief of the province, right? Afghans who were from that area, who knew that area. I spoke to one of the local council members who had lived in Zabul his whole life. And they looked at me like I was a typical stupid American asking a typical stupid question. So when I went back to this analyst and I said, look, man, I just spoke to these people. There's no Uzbeks here. He said, well, you know what? My chart tells me there are, so I'm going to go with that.
Wow.
I mean, and you saw that over and over.
Right.
I have to tell you stories like that, Judge. I mean, that's the reality of how that arrogance breeds delusion.
I had a feeling that your story would end more or less that way, given your attitude and mine and your personal familiarity and my learning from you and others what the intelligence community is like. The Israelis, for a while, funded Hamas, didn't they? As sort of a buffer zone or buffer or resistor to the Palestinian Authority back in the Arafat days?
Yes, they have. They did. There's been a few iterations of that. So Hamas comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood, basically. And at that point in the late 70s, early 80s, Israel was looking for ways to split apart the Palestinian resistance, particularly the PLO organization, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And one of the ideas was, hey, let's use these really fundamentalist groups. Let's use these religious reactionaries for our purposes. We can control them, and they will cause chaos within the Palestinian resistance. And of course, everyone, as I'm saying this, right, everyone who's listening and watching this, you know, that bell about a Frankenstein monster goes off, whether it be in Afghanistan, whether it be in Iraq, whether it be in Syria, or in Libya, or all throughout Africa. I could keep going, right? But the idea being is that was the idea. And then even later on in 2006, 2007, as the Israelis have pulled out of Gaza, ended their direct physical occupation of Gaza, and there was going to be elections, both the Americans and Israelis schemed to make sure that Fatah, which was the successor to the PLO, would replace Hamas, because they had realized we can't control this Hamas that we have helped create. And so even now, like I was saying before, what you have is the prime minister of Israel, who has had this great grand plan, this Napoleonic plan of his to win Gaza by bribing Hamas. And obviously we now know, of course, how well that plan worked out. But was that anything that anyone was ever going to be able to confront him and say, look, Mr. Prime Minister, this thing is not going to work. These people are not going to give in to some work permits and some money from the Qataris. We have occupied them. We have brutalized them. We have humiliated them. And what would you do if you were those people?
I think he's finished politically, don't you, Netanyahu? How could he possibly survive this? I know he's got 9 lives like a cat, but how could he survive this? This is the greatest assault, the greatest military defeat, the greatest intelligence failure in the history of Israel.
Well, we reelected George W. Bush. So, I mean, after 9/11, after the Iraq War, after Katrina, I mean, Netanyahu, if he's anything, he's a survivor. And so certainly people I respect who know a lot more about Israel and its politics than I do think that he's done. But I've known about this guy my entire life. Like, he keeps reappearing. I thought he was done the last time, and everyone said he was done after 98.
If he levels Gaza, I mean, that's a war crime. That's thousands, maybe millions of war crimes. No?
Oh, absolutely. First, they've made their intention of conducting war crimes. The Israeli cabinet, military officials all throughout their parliament, their Knesset, have made these statements with the intention of genocide. The idea of basically being, to paraphrase it, is to finish them, kill them all, exterminate them, if you will. And this is one of the things where you hear these theories that the Israelis knew this was coming because that they could then use this as the excuse to invade and destroy Gaza. And I don't know about those theories. I don't give them too much credit at all. But this idea that Israel, particularly this government in Israel, and particularly this cabinet, a number of the cabinet ministers have openly said this for years, that the Gaza problem has to be finished, that there has to be some sort of resolution to our problem in Gaza. And by that, they mean is the current finance minister of Israel has said this. We go into Gaza, we take it over, we give the Gazans three choices. They either pledge loyalty to us, they leave, they go someplace else, or we kill them. And this is the current finance minister of Israel who is saying these types of things. And of course, as we've seen from other Israeli officials, military officers calling them animals, suggesting that they need to be starved and die slowly because the electricity is out. And we're certainly seeing that. I think what's occurring now, Gaza has been without power for a day. So the hospitals are getting very close to their emergency generations failing. And you're going to start seeing people who are unable to survive because they can't be treated with medical care.
Has Israel ever accepted, has the United States ever accepted the two-state solution?
Certainly, that's the lip statements that were made for years. And you go to the idea of the 93 Oslo Accords and everything else. And that's the fallback for the American government and American politicians now. The two-state solution has been dead for decades, basically. And really, particularly the last 15 years, it's really been dead. It's just not viable. Israel has put too many settlers, basically, throughout the West Bank. And what they have done with the blockade of Gaza to immiserate it has effectively made any idea of a two-state solution just impossible. But this is what you talk to your member of Congress about this, and with the exception of two, Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib, this is probably the line you're going to hear, whether they're Democrat or Republican, is that they'll eventually get around to saying something about, we believe in a two-state solution, or we support a two-state solution. And that's dead. That's dead. It's just not possible. And so the only solution is a one-state solution where the groups are integrated and everyone has human and political rights. But
the predominant forces in Israel will never accept the political rights. They might accept the human rights. They'll never accept the political rights of the Gazans.
That's right, and that's why that two-state solution is dead. You've had decades of actions, of narratives, of politics to ensure that a two-state solution is not possible. One, for the physical reality of it, there's too many settlers there. And then the other reality is that political power, where it's vested in Israel, those people are never going to allow this to happen.
Here's President Putin giving his analysis of the failures of American foreign policy in the Middle East.
Unfortunately, we can see a sharp deterioration of the situation in the Middle East. I think that many will agree with me that this is a clear example of the failure of the policy of the United States in the Middle East, which tried to monopolize the resolution of the conflict, but unfortunately wasn't concerned with finding compromises acceptable to both sides. On the contrary, it promoted its own ideas about how this should be done, put pressure on both sides, first on one side, then on the other, every time without taking into account the fundamental interests of the Palestinian people, bearing in mind, first of all, the need to implement the UN Security Council decision on creation of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state.
Has that ever been the public policy of the United States of America, the correction of an independent, sovereign state?
For the Palestinians? No.
Yes.
Yeah. No. It's never been a policy of the United States, and I would think you'd be very hard pressed to find any American official in an official capacity make that statement as well, or support it. I would disagree with Vladimir Putin on a couple points in that. One of them being is where he says the U.S. policy over the last decades over Israel-Palestine has been for American interests. I would disagree, and I'd say the United States, for successive presidential administrations, has been focusing on supporting Israel first. ensuring Israel's needs are met and say ensuring Israel's interests are met if it was just an interest of American interests as opposed to supporting one side or the other. I don't think you'd see almost $4 billion a year going to Israel. I don't think you'd see an American embassy in Tel Aviv. I don't think you would see the blind eye to the apartheid system there and just the vast systemic human rights abuses that occur every day by the Israeli occupation forces.
Should Israel have expected something like this in light of the concentration camp that they run called the Gaza Strip?
It's hard to say, how could you not? It's hard to imagine that they could not. How could they not? You treat people like this, you do this, and as well as just the ongoing history of this conflict, the continual resistance to the occupation, the fighting back, if you will, the willingness in its history to have other nations come in to intervene on the Palestinians' behalf. So how could they not see this as inevitable? And it was inevitable as long as there was no political solution, as long as it wasn't just any efforts were made in good faith, efforts were made in completely bad faith for decades. To summarize the Israeli position towards negotiations with the Palestinians, it's been, give us your land or we will kill you. If you don't accept the negotiation, which is give us our land, give us your land, then we're going to kill you.
How devastating is this for President Zelensky and American aid to Ukraine?
Well, I think you're probably going to see which is more important to Washington, D.C., Israel or Ukraine. And of course, it's Israel. That was something that never else was going to be anything other than that. I think what you could even see, perhaps, because I know it's going on now, and I don't think they have yet. As we're talking, the House has even gotten to a point of having a vote for the speaker. But could you imagine a circumstance where the Democrats say, yes, we will vote for a speaker, we'll vote for a Scalise or a Jordan if they ensure aid to Israel is going? Everyone in the House would go along with that. So I think what you're going to see is you'll see some type of deal cut to make sure Israel gets what it needs or what it wants. And Ukraine, of course, will have to hope that the stars align, the moon is in its right phase in order for them to get what they desperately need to keep their war going. And it's a good juxtaposition because you do see with Ukraine the amount of money going to them, not just to arm their soldiers, but to feed their people, to keep their government running, to function as a country. Israel doesn't need that support, but the political support of Israel is so much greater that Israel will get whatever it asks for.
Here's two clips from Admiral Kirby back to back. While we're looking at Gaza now, you'll see some explosions there and very little light because there's no electricity. But here's two clips from Admiral Kirby. One is last January saying, for as long as it takes. And one is yesterday saying, we're at the end of our rope.
What do you mean by that? As long as they need. What do you mean by that? What winning looks like for you in Ukraine?
Well, as long as it takes means as long as it takes. And it means that I'm unable to give you a date certain on calendar for when that support won't be necessary anymore. It's necessary now. It's going to be necessary in coming weeks and months for certain. And we want to make sure that we're meeting the need as best we can for Ukraine. And what does winning look like? President Zelensky gets to determine what victory looks like. But in the near term, we've got appropriations and authorities for both Ukraine and for Israel. But you don't want to be trying to bake in long-term support when you're at the end of the rope. And in Ukraine, on the Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope.
Isn't that rather startling at the end of the rope?
Yeah, I think I think he kind of was portrayed by his own internal kind of thought process there and worrying about how he was now going back on his word. I mean, he's a former military officer, and the idea being is that he was an admiral. The idea being that when you pledge that type of thing, we're standing with you to the end. There's no end to this for us. The idea being is that you're going to sacrifice and you're not going to give up until you reach that point. And so I think within not 9 months, 10 months, he's reversed his stance on that. And I think because he stumbles there, right? And he
Yeah.
doesn't. He's not as smooth and as polished as he usually is. And I think it's because he's running into this realization with himself, is that we are going to betray our word to the Ukrainians, a word that should never have been given because it was impossible ever to carry out. But the harsh realities of Washington, D.C. Are really putting pressure on these men and women in the administration.
You got to think that he wouldn't have used a statement like the end of our rope without Lloyd Austin, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and the president himself having gone along with that. I don't know if this is a trial balloon, but look, Israel's going to get to the head of the line. There will be no lack of enthusiasm for support of Israel in both parties, barring a few on the extreme right and extreme left. And everybody's kind of sick and tired of Ukraine. Not everybody, but enough people. No?
I think so. That's the loyalty in Washington, D.C. is to Israel, not to Ukraine. Certainly, there are those who are going to be upset by that because they have their ideologies. They see Russia as a more important enemy for the U.S. than Hamas and the extension, Iran. But I do think that's what we're looking at here, particularly with the issue in the Congress and how Ukraine aid may be a pivot upon which things turn, that things move. And it's interesting when for the last 18, 19 months, the desire, the hope in Washington, D.C. was that the war would end because there'd be regime change. Overtly, they were saying regime change in Moscow. And I think some of them hoping maybe in Kiev as well, quietly, privately, because they knew this wasn't going to work, or it never had a chance. But the reality is maybe that the great big shift in the fortunes of the war in Ukraine comes from regime change in the United States. Maybe this whole battle over the speaker and who gets in is a person who has gotten there because they've been able to secure some type of deal that leaves Ukraine aid off the table. It's hard to think the White House would go with that, but certainly when you look at these other priorities, unfortunately, I do think that if we throw in a third priority, the American people with this Congress falls third out of those three nations.
Well, Matt Hope, thank you very much, my dear friend. Very, very helpful, very insightful. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Judge.
Of course. More as we get it. Tomorrow, by popular request, Jack Devine, Phil Giraldi, of course, will be here. I will do your questions on Ask the Judge. These are 4 separate segments. And, of course, we'll have the Intelligence Roundtable with Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.